Okay, and we're recording. Hi, everyone. I'm Jimson Lee for speedandurance.com, and welcome. Today's special edition is a reunion of the original charliefrancis.com forum. So on the call today, we got pjvazel, or PJ, I believe PJV was your handle, and he is to my left, but he might be somewhere else. We have Mike Hurst on this side here, who was KitKat, and we have Tyrone Edge over here, who is simply Tyrone. So welcome everyone. Thanks for making time for this call. I know it's we're all around the world scattered. So the main purpose of this is that on Tuesday, May 12th, it will be the 10-year anniversary of Charlie Francis passing. And I thought it'd be good to get the original founders of the blog, of the forum, to talk about the things that helped us as an athlete, as a coach. So let's start with Mike Hurst, or KitKat. The first question I have is, what effect did Charlie have on your coaching career? That's my first question.
Well, I had already coached my first Olympian to Moscow in 1980 before I met Charlie in 1982 at the Brisbane Commonwealth Games. And Charlie at that point had not really achieved anything, but I listened to his press conference because the Canadians called it, and I was utterly fascinated with everything he had to say about coaching, and I pursued him vigorously thereafter. And through the European seasons of certainly 85, 86, 87, and 88, I used to record Charlie whenever I could, my little little tape recorder, and I'd say, Charlie, have you got time for a coffee? We'd be in Zurich. Yeah, your shout. Okay, I'm happy to do that. Happy to buy you the meal, and just so we can talk and I can ask questions. Do you mind if I record it? So, a lot of different ideas, and I had a small disaster coaching in '86 at the Commonwealth Games in Edinburgh, and I rewrote everything in my training theory and came up with the concurrent theory of design, program design, and how it worked together. And some of that I would attribute to the lateral thinking mindset of Charlie Francis. And then when we got to Seoul, in the lead into Seoul, he really did nurse me through that process, because I thought I had two athletes that had a chance to at least PB, and if they PB'd, who knew what would happen? And he talked me through the design principles of a successful taper. And I know that a lot of people think that taper is all psychological, it's all bullshit, and so many people fail to taper at the Olympics or at the major championships of the year. But my two people ran massive PBs, ran Australian Open records, both reached the Olympic finals against all expectations other than from within our own squad. So for Charlie, thanks, old man. Wonderful achievement, wonderful help to me personally, from a purely coaching point of view, coaching methodology. And many, many, many years later, I hosted Frano, Stephen Francis, the coach of some very red-hot Jamaicans, in a Sydney meet when he brought Asafa Powell out here to Australia. And I asked him about what he thought was Charlie's contribution, or if at all he had any thoughts on Charlie Francis. He said, everybody in the world has been influenced by Charlie Francis. And I was just one of those people.
That's a great story.
So,
that's a great story. And it's kind of nice, actually, Mike, in today's world, whenever I talk about the 400, people used to say long to short, short to long. And nowadays, people are actually saying the concurrent method. It's actually 3 methods to train a 400-meter runner. So that's a good testament to hear that when people talk about that. PJ, what were your thoughts? What did you take away from Charlie's experience in the maybe what the 10, 11 years that you've known him through the internet?
So I started going on internet early 2000s, and my main objective to go on internet was to find things about sports history, athletic history. So I was browsing. There was no Google or things like that at that time. I can't remember how. Not a lot of resources, and one of the few resources regarding athletics where you could talk to people were the IWF forum, which is now for 15 years maybe, and charliefrancis.com forum. So I was going there really as a student of sports history, and I was not coaching obviously because I was only 20 or 22 years old at that time. And I was kind of harassing Charlie on question regarding what they did in 86, on 82, on what if he saw this athlete on 88, or and sometimes he would reply to me, sometimes not, because he was not really, he was willing to speak about history, but he was more interesting talking about politics sometimes.
Yeah.
Which is something that is really funny, because he had very strong opinions regarding politics sometimes, and I was only obsessed regarding training history. And actually, one day, one Nigerian athlete asked me to coach him because I was an IF reporter at that time, 2004. And I had no coaching experience, but I had a lot of experience regarding biomechanics, statistics, history. And in this way of research, I had also learned a lot of regarding training, but that was not my main intent. I was really more into biomechanics and history. But of course, you got to read a lot of things about training, and I got immersed into training theories and philosophies of Charlie's and a lot of other coaches. And when it came out, I spoke to Charlie, and he was one of the coaches that encouraged me to start coaching. And I was really not sure because I was only 23. And Charlie was one, Dan Paff was one, and a few others like this. And it started like this with my first athlete, and 1 year later, he would become the youngest semi-finalist at World Champs at 100 meters. The next year, he would break the African record at 100 meters in 9:85, which still stands. And 2008 became world indoor champion. And although, and Mike, I remember we had many conversations also on the private message regarding problems I could encounter, especially in Melbourne 06. I remember phoning you about, I can't remember what, but we were living crazy stories at that time. And Mike have been a very good counselor and mentor for during all those years when I was a young coach dealing with crazy situation with Nigeria.
Well, I think what really impressed me, PJ, when you were coaching, well, we know who you're coaching at the time, that you were still active on the forum. You were actually posting your updates on the forum while attending to your athlete, the morning heats, massaging him, going back to the village, and you were apologizing how you weren't able to update people. And we know how internet is really crappy at the big stage, right? So that's what struck me. Like, my God, he should be taking care of his athlete.
No, I mean, I pestered PJ to actually post and give us a kind of diary for the for charliefrancis.com, and I thought it was fascinating, and we understood that he wasn't going to be able to do it every day because communications in those days were pretty shit still.
Yeah.
I had nowhere to
And
sleep.
but where did you sleep over there? You know,
I can't remember how I managed to post things, but
Yeah.
I had to cheat with the accreditation. I had no accreditation during the whole thing.
oh
I
my god,
to sneak in the village and sleep on the floor.
oh, I remember you
Reminds me.
saying that.
Bring me
Yeah,
food in the street of the village, but it was.
Oh my
reminds me of Daniel
god.
Saint Hilaire when he was coaching Bruni Surin, and he went to Barcelona, and I think he was his coach then, and he wasn't accredited, so he rented a car and he slept in the car the whole time, and this is a coach, So anyway, let's continue, Tyrone. Tyrone, so you're a bit special because you actually live in the same city as Charlie. So what kind
Yeah.
of experience did you have from the forum, and what did you learn from Charlie? Did you know Charlie before the forum?
I grew up, when I was growing up, I grew up in Scarborough, Ontario. And when I was, a grade school kid, Ben Johnson was from Scarborough, a kind of a working class suburb of Toronto. And he was the fastest man in the world. And like, we'd see him driving his Ferrari around once in a while and stuff like that. But he was like the biggest sports star, probably, well, by far in Canada. He like eclipsed Wayne Gretzky at that point as the Canada's biggest sports star. And I think it's really important in Canadian history that we had like this young immigrant star from Jamaica who was like basically the best in the world at what he did. And people were embracing him as a Canadian, because I think a lot of the times before that, like, top Canadian sports stars were these like hockey players and stuff, right? Who, look different than him, talk different than him. I think he was a really special in that sense, from in a very important way in Canadian history. Like, every kid wanted to be like him. And I think that was a really important and cool thing at that time, looking back. And so like, just having grown up in that neighborhood, like in, where he came from, we obviously felt, a little more attached to him than probably many other people did. And we didn't know much about his coach or any of the history at that time. But I still remember the day that like he won in Seoul, and I'd come on at like 1 a.m, and we still had like some rabbit ear TV. My parents were too cheap / poor to get cable, so you had to kind of watch it on CBC over the antenna. And I remember like waking up really like at 2:30 in the morning or something, and going to my parents' room and saying, "What happened? Did he win?" And they said, "Yeah, he won." And I saw the replays and stuff like that. And he didn't just win; he completely and utterly obliterated the field. So it was quite a performance. And then of course we all know what happened after that, and it was pretty devastating in a lot of different ways that we're probably not going to get into here. But regardless, like at the time that I'd always liked track and field, but I'm not a very good athlete. Actually, I'm a very poor athlete. And it didn't stop me from wanting to like train and get better. When the forum was around in like the early 2000s, and I like, to be clear, I was not an early communicator on the forum or anything. I lurked for a long time, and I asked questions, and I was very careful about like stepping on toes. I knew these people were a lot smarter than I was, so I wasn't going to get in the middle of some conversation and start trying to sound smart. So I just asked a lot of questions, and it helped me a lot. So I actually, what happened was I came to like coaching through actually training as a track athlete. I was like close to my 30s. I was like skinny fat. I was smoking. I was out of shape. And I had started to like just do some kind of like long distance running, which I hated. It's just the worst. I hated the people who did it. I didn't like the training sucked. It's boring as hell, like just going out and running long repeats. And like these people that you just encounter are just not my people, man. I didn't like them at all. All you distance runners out there, not apologizing one bit. go to hell. I have no time for you. So, you know, I found this kind of like, I found Charlie's site, and I was like, I'm gonna train. I gotta like find a track coach and like start running old guy track. So I happened to do that, and I really started getting into the high performance information that he offered, and bought a bunch of his products, and just found myself staying up till like 2 or 3 in the morning reading and rereading a lot of this information. And one thing I will say is that, you know, I think everybody should pick mentors, and instead of reading a book a week, I think you should consider finding a mentor who resonates with you and reading that one person's book 10 times before moving on to something else. Because I think that's really the way you learn. You go to the best, you find the best, and the best who resonates with you, and that's important. Charlie's work resonated with me. He donated a lot of his time. He also taught his athletes how to advocate for themselves in a way that they probably didn't necessarily get taught growing up, because they came from working class backgrounds or immigrant backgrounds, right? And I can definitely sympathize with that. And Charlie had a privileged background, so he taught them how to demand certain things. And that I can be honest with you, I know that pissed some people off in Canada at the time, but I think it was a very important lesson that he taught his athletes. And as coaches, I think if I was going to say one of the most important things that I learned from all of Charlie's teachings, and not about like all the innovative things that he did, and how to think differently, and how people who sometimes like completely miss the, you know, forest for the trees, so to speak, when they look at his stuff. He was a gifted person. And when I say gifted, I'm not saying smart. I'm saying gifted people, and I'm a teacher. Gifted people think differently. So they think outside the box. They connect things differently in a way that's not immediately obvious to a lot of others. You really have to kind of think carefully about the structure they put around things in order to understand it fully. And that's something that Charlie was really good at. Like, for example, like the reason that he liked using the bench press, you know, the reason that he liked it was completely out of left field compared to what most people would think, right? Whereas most people with their weight program would be moving towards these specific movements and getting strong in these specific movements. He would do the opposite. And like, all those things need to be studied carefully. And that's why, again, if you find a mentor and you pick a mentor that resonates with you, read that mentor's material 10 times instead of moving on and just like reading books once. I think that's a big mistake. And that's something I learned from him. Anything he wrote, I would go back and read it over and over again. And then as I started to coach, when I would go back and read that material again, it would reveal more to me each time I read it, because I had a greater understanding experientially from working with athletes. So that material to me is almost like a living document. It continues to give to me 20 years after I first saw it. So I know I kind of like probably, you know, wandered a little bit there, but those would be my most important things. The ultimate key though that I learned from him was that coaching should be a transformational experience for the athlete and the coach as well. But your athlete should gain transformational experience from you. And looking back, I think even though my coaching career, you know, I haven't produced any international medal winners or anything close to that, and I'm completely fine with that. But I put a lot of time and energy and effort into like learning the trade a little bit. And my athletes went on to like form businesses. They're like successful entrepreneurs now, and they attribute a lot of what they kind of learned or how to go about that to the work that we put into training. And I think kind of all coaches are a little bit entrepreneurial in a way, right? Like we talked about just a moment ago with PJ sleeping in his, you know, sneaking into the village and sleeping on the floor and like having to get someone to bring him food. Like I think we've all had those weird situations, and we just look at it as part of what it takes to get the job done. And yeah, I think that transformational experience, it helped me moving forward. But my athletes also got help too. And I attribute that to what I learned from Charlie, like coaching as a transformational experience. It's a life teaching experience. It's not just something
Yeah.
specific to sport.
No, absolutely. So let's get down to the nitty gritty of the form. It must have been what, like 200,000 pages and what, at least 10, 11 years of good content. Mike, KitKat, what was your favorite thread out of all the pages and years that we were on topic?
Well, I am biased, but it was the lactate threshold thread, which was really a discussion primarily about the 400 meters and how to help athletes of various backgrounds prepare to run a pretty quick 400, and just some formula, and just essentially what I learned on my journey working with Darren Clark and Marie Holland and others before them and others after them. And I tried to put down on paper, I tried to just contribute to a discussion that was going with PJ and others before I joined in. And I just had good fun because I was getting sensible inquiries and requests for a bit more information here and there, and gradually it unfolded and it just became this massive tome. And when Charlie passed away, and even before that, he said, you know, what do you want for this? And I said, I don't want any money for it. And when Charlie passed, he said, we're thinking of putting it out as it's kind of like a 400 meter type how-to document and marketing it. And I said, well, you keep it. And then after Charlie died, I said to Ange, you keep that, and any money that comes in from it, use it towards James's upbringing, their young son, lovely young guy. And so I feel like in some ways that I returned or repaid the debt that I owed Charlie for even talking to me as a young guy who had really achieved nothing. I mean, I had coached an Olympian, but she was a blowout, you know, cannon fodder at 2 straight Olympics. And so it was going nowhere. And so, yeah, I feel that that thread, that the lactate threshold thread, was kind of almost like a testament to my coaching career, because I dumped everything into that, and I told no lies and I didn't hold back anything. And it seems as though other people may have looked at it and read it and thought favourably of it, and that was essentially how I constructed the concurrent theory and why I did it, and the outcomes, which were 44.38 for a boy and 50.24 for a woman. And those times, looking back on Rio, Darren would have finished 6th on that time in the Rio final, and Marie Holland would have finished 4th in the women's final with that time. And so I think that the methodology kind of stands up in a relatively drug-free era today. They both made finals, but they, you know, in Seoul, which I think was the dirtiest games in history, for reasons we don't need to go into. But you know, Darren finished 4th there, and Marie finished last in the women's. Well, she, you know, she would have finished 4th in Rio. So I think the methodology and the understanding and the concept of the program, the concurrent program, which the British, of course, have changed terminology to call it a conjugated program, just to make it even more complicated and more covert, which is exactly the opposite to what I was trying to get across. I wanted to open it up and let people think about it and try it. And if they liked it, it's yours.
And for the record, that document is available on sale on charliefrancis.com. You can actually purchase that PDF. I believe it's what, $9.95. Very inexpensive. Great reading if you want to read it. PJ, what was your favorite thread, or which thread did you learn a lot from and move forward with?
This lactate threshold thread is coming first to mind because I think it was the largest thread on the it was the most followed, and yes, sometimes it would digress and we would come back into training and for 400, but I think so many aspects of training, methodology and philosophies are covered. It was just incredible. And I would add that a lot of people, a lot of coaches that are coaching now and are from my generation were on this forum. And I'm not sure I would acknowledge it now, but maybe later. Takes time. And I really have no... I logged in before I was coaching, so I was not going to change my nickname anyway. When I started coaching, it would not make no sense. But I know a lot of coaches now, very successful coaches around the world that were either contributors or just readers of this forum and learned a lot on this like thread and on many threads. And the other day I was attending a Zoom conference with young coaches. It's funny to call them young coaches because I consider now a middle coach, 40 years old, but they are like 20 or 25 years old. Like when the same age when I started, and they were mentioning at some point Charlie Francis regarding, I can't remember what, but it was not really on point. Still mention it like a reference, and I found it so interesting. And I was like, oh, they mention him like a trustable and very how can I say, a very important source of training philosophy or methodology. Matveyev or Verkhoshansky or who else, you know. So I found it very interesting that the latest generation of coaches that are 20 years old are now using Charlie's name as a reference.
Yeah, wonderful story.
Interesting. It's not really mastering what he was saying.
You'd have to listen to him twice with Charlie. Like you said, Tyrone, you have to repeat, find a mentor and just listen over and over again, reread his books. And same with his videos, rewatch his videos, reread his notes. Tyrone, how about yourself? What was your best thread of the forum?
Okay, so for the sake of being different, everybody loved the lactate threshold training thread and learned a lot from it. I mean, that's how I got my start in coaching. When I was coaching literally I started coaching a guy who asked me, he was like a college athlete, very talented, but kind of didn't train much because he was always hurt. So I used the lactate threshold thread to take a guy from, okay, this sounds preposterous, but you have to understand this guy was very talented. And I was able to corral his raging attention deficit disorder into the direction of training for, a period of time. We went from early March, where he was 216 pounds when he started out, pretty muscular. We trained for, basically until we got to our national finals at the end of June. He was down to 186 pounds. His personal best was 49.06 when we started, and obviously he was well out of that shape at the time. He ended up running 47.51 and making a national final in 13 weeks based off the lactate threshold threads training philosophy. That's no joke. So that's where I started. So if anybody wants to know if Mike's concurrent style training works, if you're a coach learning how to coach the 400 meters, to me, it's the ultimate way of starting out because it takes elements from both sides of the coin and incorporates them, and it gets to the point quickly. So if you cannot ignore Mike Hurst's concurrent theory if you're a new coach to the 400 meters. You can ignore it, but you're an idiot if you do. Put it that way. When it comes to threads, like, I mean, obviously that was a very important one, and I got tremendous results from it, but I got a lot out of a lot of different things. And the one thing was, I would say, is whenever I asked a question, the one thing that I have to say about Charlie is he was a tremendous educator, in the sense that he always gave me the elegantly simple answer that I needed or that I could absorb at that time. Even though there was a deep backstory of why he was giving me that answer, he never overcomplicated things and always gave me what I needed so that I could go take action on it right now. And that is an art that very few people have. And like, being a great educator is completely different from being a great coach. And he was both. And that's something that I always greatly appreciated about him. And, you know, so that's why, to me, like, I would just read everything, even if it doesn't directly apply to my situation. I was just trying to absorb his essence. And to me, that was like the most important thing about reading that kind of work.
Yeah. So for me, other than Lactate Threshold, the other one was Victor Conte of Snack. He was an active reader and writer on the blog, and I love that whole area of supplements. And so I had conversations with him, and I actually met him in person several times after meeting him on the forum, because I was living in the Bay Area, and that's where Balco was, right? Bay Area laboratories were. So learning all the stuff about supplements was wonderful. So that's what I gained on top of the other million things I learned. Okay, one last question, guys. I know it's getting late for everybody here, so let's talk about the funniest thread. The funniest thread. Keep it clean. It's being recorded. The funniest thread you've had that you came across on this forum. Last question. Mike Hurst, you go first.
I'm flat-footed here. I don't remember, but for me, Charlie had a unique way. Maybe it's not unique, but he had a special way of communicating. He saw the humor in everything, and everything he ever said was wise. And he was upfront. I loved him when people would come out and say just ridiculous shit on there. And he would come and he'd just say, "Hey, you know, get a grip." I just remember him saying that writing that so many times on the forum. Get a grip. And, you know, he would comment all the time, and he would always wisecrack and just see humor in absurdist humor. He was magnificent. He could have been a great scriptwriter for something like Jerry Seinfeld or one of those kind of programs. But I'm sorry, I can't remember a specific incident other than to say all of his lectures, if you ever get a chance to buy some of his coaching videos off charliefrancis.com, that humor will come across in his presentations. And even for that much, it's worth logging in to get a taste of the guy. He's been demonized after Soul, but his contribution to coaching and to coaching methodology and to the use of science and many of the ideas were out of left field, but they've nearly all been corroborated and reinforced by science or by experience, and you know, ever since. So his contribution continues to this day.
Yeah, I agree 100%. PJ, what was your funniest thread you come across? I have two, so I got two stories. So.
Oh, yeah, no, I can't really.
Yeah. It's 10 years ago, right?
Like Mike said, he had a very sharp sense of humor, and sometimes he was very, very, very sharp, and with one word, it could make a lot of devastation.
Yeah,
for sure.
But other than that, you know, what I keep is not really a method actually, or workouts, or but the best advice he could tell me was ask him regarding my athlete. If I had a question, ask him. You athlete will tell him. He will tell you. He will guide you. Um, look at what he does, and you will find the answer. You know, those kind of critic thing. Maybe as a young coach, I was looking for receipt, but he was telling me that the answer was under my eyes, and I had to open the eyes and find it. And that's trusting the athlete was the main lesson I could get from Charlie. And this is huge.
Yeah, sounds good. Tyrone, you want to go ahead next? Funniest.
I think funniest. I you know, there's all kinds of examples of biting humor and stuff like that. But I think that the underlying thing underneath the humor and underneath all of those kind of things was the desire to get people to consume the information in a way that they would action it. And that to me was the most important part. Is like, one of the things that I think we miss now is when somebody comes out with some kind of cockamamie scheme for sprinting. We don't have the great bullshit collar that we had, you know, when Charlie was alive, and with the kind of gravitas to put someone in their place who doesn't really know what they're talking about. I think we're missing that a little bit now, and that's one of the things I would say was the greatest kind of effect of the humor. And what PJ said as well, I have to say I 1000% agree. And having worked with athletes who had no success under like a traditional kind of like team oriented program, to have tremendous success coming into a program that when they worked with me, it's not because I'm so great. It's because, you know, a lot of the times, exactly what PJ said, I would ask my athlete and they would tell me, and nobody had ever believed them before or ever listened to them before, or never mind that, never even thought of asking them. How screwed up is that? Like, you have the ultimate like expert, you know, who's outputting like much more force than any other athlete on your team can, and then you end up just, you know, yelling at them for not being able to complete a workout or whatever. It's like, maybe you're wrong in this situation, and maybe the athlete's right, you know. Instead of like prioritizing all your like athletes who can do all the work but end up running half a second slower, why don't you cater the workout, you know, to each person as needed, and, you know, get out of the box you're living in, and start thinking. And that's really what I learned the most. And I was able to take that very quickly and get success with it. So that's the lasting legacy of all the kind of like different wacky kind of like humor that there was there, is like the desire to get you thinking and acting as soon as possible to get good results for your people.
Yeah, I think, okay, before I wrap it up tonight, two of my favorite stories. So number one was the longest argument on who was faster over 10 meters, a sprinter or a powerlifter, or a sprinter versus a shot putter. We would argue for endless days who was faster. And we had this one guy named Tim Lane, who was the fastest man over 10 meters. And there's another guy named Flash, who Derek knows out of Texas. He's an IP lawyer. And they were going to have a clash between Flash versus Tim Lane over 10 meters, and we were going to have competitions. I think even Clemson wanted to join in too, because he had somebody who was faster. And all this, you know, rivalry started to race 10 meters. Now, of course, all this ended in 2008 when Usain Bolt came around, and he had the fastest split over 10 meters, and that put the end to the conversation. But we had this long-standing argument, and even to this day, people think a powerlifter is faster over 10 meters than a sprinter. It just kills me, right? I think everyone agrees on that one, right? So, but the other one I really I'm proud of is with this privileged boy, young boy. I don't know what race he was, where he lived, but he was given $5 a day for coffee money or Starbucks money. His parents gave him $5 a day, $20 or $25 a week, to have a coffee or a cappuccino or hot chocolate after school, and he would wait until his parents came home at 5:36. And he was asking me, well, what should I do with that money? And I was saying, well, the best thing to do is the post-recovery, protein shake. So stop buying your coffee after school, save your money. And we were all collaborating. It was, I mean, I was terrified that the kid's parent was going to log in the site and find out that he was asking us. But that was a story where, there were like 10 of us asking and helping this boy that he just said he wanted to be a better athlete. And here we were saying, stop drinking coffee, take this, take that, take ZMA, take this. And I don't know what happened to him. I have no idea what his name was, but it didn't matter back then. It didn't matter who you were. Everyone was there to help. And that was the beauty of the forum. It was a central place way before YouTube, before Facebook, and everyone was able to help each other, and all for free. No one made any money on it. And yeah, so those are my two favorite stories. So let's wrap this up. Mike Hurst, any final closing thoughts on tonight's call?
I just think that when I was being coached as a young fella, coaching was a little bit too deadly serious, as if you were going to get to the Olympic final. Come on, guys. Charlie was getting people to Olympic finals, world championships, and he made it fun. He just made it fun for me and showed me that, yeah, you can really express yourself and let the silliness out sometimes, but don't let it run the show. Just keep on track, but have as much fun as you can. And, he was an awesome guy. And anyone who never got to meet him, it's your loss.
Yeah, I agree. PJ, any closing thoughts before we wrap it up?
Well, this obviously I wouldn't be a coach if I hadn't come across this forum, and I'm still coaching now, so it's a long journey. And they also having personal conversation and exchanges with Angela Kuhn Francis changed me a lot, because she made me discover that I was celiac. But it changed my life. Stop eating bad bread and stuff. So this kind of changes, exchanges and meetings people regarding sports and things out of life, is something really sweet. And what I love about sports and communication and meeting people, that's a transformation, as Tyrone said, transformation for the athlete, but also for the coaches. And I've transformed in a good way, I think, meeting Charlie and Ange.
Yeah, sounds good. Tyrone, last closing thoughts?
The one thing I would say is to anybody listening is if you're serious about being a better athlete or serious about potentially coaching, you don't even have to be interested in coaching. If you want to be a better athlete or even a better person, I would go to charliefrancis.com and just buy everything and watch it as many times as you need to. That information it's crazy how cutting edge it is 20 years later. Because things that I thought that maybe, time had changed the mind about, or science had changed our minds about, I'm actually changing back to what I think Charlie had to say in a lot of cases, especially around movement. And that information is it's tremendous to this day. And the biggest thing, again, like PJ said, is it's not about some workout or some exact protocol. It's about how to think about this stuff in a way where you're going to get success, where 80% of other people are spinning around in a circle chasing their tail, and you are doing the one big thing that matters, that's right, that's going to get you 80% of the results.
Yeah, that sounds great. Okay, so on that note, so if there's a demand, we'll have this call again at this same time zone. I'll organize it maybe in 2 weeks' time, and if you can come back, great. Invite some of the other forum contributors that you know of. So on that note, I am going to stop the recording. And yeah, thanks guys for making time for this.